recently, the licensing company that owns the name and image of Elvis Presley, they're called Authentic Brands Group. They sent cease and desist letters to several wedding chapels telling them to stop using the unapproved Elvis Presley name, likeness, voice, image, anything else related to Elvis. And Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, those are all legally protected names. And so all these wedding chapels were being told they've got to stop. And that's a rough thing for Vegas. The wedding industry in that city brings in $2 billion a year. It's huge. It's one of the things Vegas is known for. And for so many of them to have to stop using their bread and butter, that could be very difficult for them. There have been a lot of angry responses from chapel owners, Elvis impersonators. Even the mayor of Las Vegas was upset about this legal action. There was such a backlash that, according to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, they said Authentic Brands Group was now offering the chapels financial partnerships, which includes annual licensing deals to continue business as usual. And I think those were in the range of $20,000 a year.
Okay, so it's like they're trying to franchise it in a way.
They're trying to franchise it. So not just a straight up cease and desist. They backtracked on that and said $20,000, which is better, but still, I don't know how much. I imagine this is still going to hurt at least some of those chapels.
Yeah, especially if you're talking about per year, you got to pay that.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that is. Considering that a lot of licensing deals are, even when I'm thinking, not licensing deals, but I'm thinking even like franchises, generally you pay a one-time franchise fee and then you're able to, have McDonald's in XYZ neighborhood. And of course, you got to give up a certain amount of the profits to McDonald's every year to operate that building. But it's interesting that they're going this route. And this also shows that they're trying to repivot the brand. It's what we talk about with when you're hot. When you're hot, you're not thinking about these things. I bet when they were at the peak of their industry, they had tons and tons of fans visiting Graceland, buying merch, and all of those different people licensing Elvis for different movies or whatnot, that they were like, we don't need to worry about all these things. And then now that the fan base is starting to die off, and now that they're no longer hot, they're trying to scramble and figure out, well, how do we keep revenue coming in instead of having the whole Elvis Presley estate die off or consistently lose money or make it to where we have to sell Graceland potentially one day because no one's visiting it anymore.
Yeah.
It's important to continue to look forward even when things are going really well. You're even seeing the dangers of that with like a company like Netflix. Netflix is a great example of this because when they first came out, they were the only people in town. I mean, you think about it, before we would rent movies through Blockbuster, right? And for people that don't know, Blockbuster actually had an opportunity to be the first Netflix. And they turned that down and said, hey, nobody's going to want to have movies mailed to them and have to mail it back and all those type of things. And Netflix like, cool, I'll do it. And they blew up. And for a long, long time, they were the only streaming company. And then so now that there's competition, and now there's the Hulu, there's Paramount Plus, there's just Disney Plus, there's so many of these streaming giants now that you're starting to see Netflix lose subscribers. And they're now scrambling and trying to figure out, how do we get our subscribers back? Or if we're going to lose subscribers, how do we make more money off the subscribers we do have? And I use that as an analogy for like what's going on with Elvis Presley. And does this happen with your business? Or right now, are you just killing it? And you're not thinking about the future that's going to catch up to you. So, or maybe you were killing it before but now you're struggling, and it could because you wasn't thinking about a strategy that's going to move you into the future of your industry. So it's always important to be in the present, but at the same time, notice the trends that are happening in your industry and trying to stay ahead of it. So like a good example of this might be, well, before my customers would just call me, like say this is pre-pandemic, and you have a business that a lot of people were calling you to set appointments. Hey, I want to set an appointment for you to come out and groom my pet, for example. And you were doing just fine. Pandemic hits, and it's like, oh, the phone stops ringing. Well, it's because you don't really have much of a digital presence. But if you were staying on top of the trend, you would notice more and more and more people are doing transactions on their phone. It's like the matter of fact, if you really think about the behavior of the consumer, people are on their phones more than they are on any other devices in the house. Even when they're watching TV, they have their phone in their hands. Even when they're on their computer, they have the phone right next to it. And matter of fact, when they're on the computer and their phone rings, they'll stop what they're doing on the computer to look at their phone. Like that's how much priority your phone has. Exactly.
Well, I'm sorry. Were you saying something, Nick?
Exactly, buddy. And it's like, and for the people that got caught out is because they weren't staying on top of the fact that this was trending. This is the way the market's moving. So we need to make sure that we have ads running on Google. We need to have ads running on Bing. We need to have some Facebook ads. And TikTok's a big one now. But we need to start having these ads out there because this is the way the market is moving. And then to take it even a step further, say, well, if the market is moving in this direction where everyone is doing everything on their phone, then how friendly is my website to these users? Do we allow them to book appointments easily on my website? How easy do we make it for them to do business with us based off of their behavior? And if you're not thinking this way, even if you're hot right now, it's going to catch up with you, and those trends are going to be here in the market. And before you know it, you're going to be trying to catch up to it. And all of your competitors that were realizing that this trend was happening and they were preparing themselves for this are going to have the jump on you. And then you're going to be looking up wondering, how do I get back to the level I once was at?
Back to Elvis. I think this mindset that you're talking about, it's really unfortunate how it's harming a lot of these business owners in Las Vegas, because this has been going on for 45 years. Quick little history of Elvis themed weddings. It started in, so 1947 was when the first wedding chapel opened in Vegas. It was called Gretna Green. And 20 years later, Elvis himself was there. He didn't get married there. I think he was probably just looking around, but he visited the chapel. And then he and Priscilla got married later that year at the Aladdin Hotel in Vegas. And then after he died in 1977, the owners of Gretna Green Chapel had the idea to make it Elvis themed. So they changed their name to Graceland Wedding Chapel. And that's when it started, the first Elvis themed chapel. So this has been going on since 77. A whole bunch of others have come up since then, and it's just become a huge piece of Vegas. Well, when it's been going on for so long, all these people think, hey, we're in the clear. We're not doing anything wrong here. No one's ever coming after us. So they just keep operating like normal. And then bam, out of nowhere, they get this C&D saying, you need to stop using Elvis. I'm not saying that the group was wrong to take legal action. I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying it's taken so long that the timing is just really, really bad to do it so suddenly. Not even an announcement, not even like, hey, you got a year, 2 years to get stuff in order before we start saying, hey, you got to pay for this. Just to be so abrupt, you're really messing with people's livelihoods. And to let it go for so long, it just says like, yeah, this was no big deal for a while Elvis was still popular, so they weren't even thinking about it. And then now that visits to Graceland are dropping, now that, he's just gradually moving out of the public conscious. And now that there's a movie coming out, they were probably saying, revenue's dipping, probably going to get a short-term spike from this movie. We better be ready to cash in on it. So it's just a really unfortunate move, even though, again, they do have the rights to it because it is his name and image is their intellectual property. They own that, and they need to be the brand guardians of it. Okay, so I get that. But to let it slide for so long, and then all of a sudden, it's just very questionable timing. But, yeah, I do understand, like, hey, we need to make sure that our property here and Elvis's legacy is being protected. And it's not just being used willy-nilly. It's not being used in every single car commercial that wants to use it and whatnot. It's being used wisely. Yeah, that is important. I just do feel bad for the chapel owners.
I agree. They definitely could have done it a different way. I'm sure of that. And the thing that I wonder is, how does this help them connect with the next generation? Because at that, them going to Las Vegas and saying, you need to stop using our image unless you pay for a license, doesn't solve the problem that they have, which is the generation that grew up and loved Elvis Presley is dying off. And that the new generation, matter of fact, I mean, there's a big part of the population that, lack of a better word, cancels Elvis.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like you should be more focused on creating excitement around Elvis, creating a rebirth. It's like, this is the one thing that I feel that's hip hop does better than, say, with rock and roll figures, is that Tupac, for example, has been long and gone for over 20 years. I mean, and not that long ago, Coachella did a concert with a hologram of this man. So, it's like you and I grew up listening to it, but even my kids know who this man is. And I'm not around the house playing his type of music because, I have kids. I'm thinking about, is this type of content good for them? But they know about him because the whole thing with hip hop does a really good job of making him relevant even in today's day and age. And it's like, that is where I would focus if I was behind Elvis. It was like, we got to start connecting to the youth. And I just don't know if being so focused on weddings in Las Vegas, if that's going to bring them back. And matter of fact, how do we amplify what's happening in Vegas? And these are like the conversations. And of course, we're not in those rooms, and maybe it did happen. But the final result, and that's what I'm basing this off of, was that the final result was like, there wasn't any marketing put out there, any type of messaging, any type of storytelling to get people excited about what's happening in Vegas with doing an Elvis wedding, being a part of the Elvis culture that's going to resonate with the young people to keep this man's legacy going.
I agree. It's really short-term thinking at first just to shut it down. And now a big piece of Vegas culture that revolves around this brand that you own is now about to be invisible because you're telling people to stop doing it. And then you turn around and say, okay, well, you can keep doing it, but you've got to pay this much. Well, not everybody's going to do that. So you're diminishing it just to get money. But what are you doing to build the brand?
Exactly.
And like you said, that's not doing anything to connect with young people. Maybe, and even with this movie, if there's any bump for young people who are learning about Elvis for the first time, it was Walk the Line where I knew who Johnny Cash was, heard a few songs, but never really was that interested. And then after seeing that movie, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I should listen to this music. This is pretty good. I'm sure there'll be some young people who get into Elvis a little bit after that. It's not going to be huge. It's not going to be long term, I think. And so they're really thinking short term about this instead of reinventing the Elvis brand for a new generation.
I agree.
Yeah. Las Vegas itself did a good job of kind of revamping their own branding to appeal to a younger generation. For a long time, what was the slogan of Vegas? What happens here? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was great. Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's a great example of embracing the negative and turning it into a positive. Yeah, people come here to do shady things, but we're just not going to talk about it. You just keep coming here and have a great time. They embraced that, and it became a fantastic, iconic tourism slogan. But then over the years, they recognized when you're telling people what happens here stays here. Okay, well, what's one thing you're not going to do when you're in Las Vegas? Take pictures and share them online, right?
Because it's got to stay there.
It's got to stay there. You don't want your wife seeing these pictures. You don't want to lose your job. So they were like, well, this younger generation loves taking pictures and sharing their memories. They want to share with people. So let's tweak the slogan. And so now it's what happens in Vegas only happens in Vegas. I'm like, and it's not as great. It's not as iconic as the other one. No, it's definitely not. But it does send a new message. Like, hey, this is a really unique place. And they, when they rolled that out, they started pumping this hashtag, Only Vegas, because they were encouraging people to take pictures because they want people to share their experiences and their memories of Las Vegas, and they want other people experiencing FOMO. So they did a great job with that slogan of just showing the younger generation, hey, go ahead, it's cool, you can share pictures from here.
So that's a great example because Vegas is already popular in many, many people's minds, and people think of it as, Sin City. And for them to have that forethought and recognize this trend that's happening, which is, hey, the younger generation, they are more willing to share their personal life. And so that's astute of them to see that this trend is happening, knowing, and here's the thing, they're not the main spenders in Vegas. They're not the ones. I mean, if you really start and think about it, it's like, okay, I'm trying to create a message for people that are in their early 20s. I would love, if this isn't you, I would love to know the people that were making way more money at 20 than they are now in their 40s or their 50s. Love to know who you are. Leave a comment below. In my experience, that's less common. That someone in their 20s is making more than they are when they get older and further in their career. And just basing off of my experience, more people start making more money when they get in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. And you would think, why do we need to switch up when they're coming here and spending money in our casinos? They're coming here and spending it on our shows and et cetera. We got to start thinking about the longevity and the trend that's happening, and that these people are going to eventually be the 30 and 40-year-olds. For them to recognize this, it's just so smart, and it's such a lesson to take from it and say, like, even though it's a good thing that's happening for us, let's also keep our eye on the future.
Man, I hope things get squared away with these Vegas wedding chapels because I told my wife, if we ever go to Vegas, we're going to pretend we're not married so that we can get married in Elvis Chapel. She just rolled her eyes. She's like, there's no way that's happening.
It sounds like a lot of fun. I would do it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I just told her, don't be cruel.
No, that's funny, dude.